Welcome to the Robert Lewis Sermon Podcast. The following is a session from Men's Fraternity. We hope that you're encouraged in your walk with Christ and enjoy this episode.
Today we complete the first half of this year's Men's Fraternity. It's gone pretty quick, hasn't it? And I think you'd probably join with me in saying that it's been a great first half. We've not only learned a lot, but I think along the way we've had a lot of fun as well. And in the next session, Bill Wellens is going to be taking command of the ship and is going to be directing us as men to discovering our particular unique design. And that should be a wonderful adventure that's ahead of us, and how that unique design complements the great adventure that we're on. I thought, though, this morning, since I'm completing the first half, we could just pause for a moment and go all the way back to the first session and review the promises that I made to you about Men's Fraternity and what it would do, and see how we're doing on our promises. So let me just review them for you just for a moment. I promised you that in our time together that you would have a chance to think deeply about who you are and where you're going. I promised you that you would have the opportunity to interact with other men who could help you think more clearly and more objectively about your life and where it was going. I promised you that you would learn a way to focus your life, and that we would give you a life focus worksheet as a draft, that you could begin to assemble your thoughts and hopefully your visions for the future. I promised you that you could develop a personal mission statement before we're finished. I promised you that you would gain a better understanding of your unique design and what makes you come alive. And then lastly, I promised you that you would have the opportunity to choose your future. To choose your future. Because every man needs to choose his future. For you young men in the first half of life, this whole opportunity that we've been on called the Great Adventure is for you to have a jump start on what is the best of the first half of life. And I hope you're beginning to get a vision for what that means so that you can get ahead of the game and ahead of the curve. And for you older men like myself, we said the Great Adventure would give you the opportunity to retool for the second half of life and to take the best out of that second half. Now, those were the promises that we made. And except for this unique design that we're going to be discovering in the second half of Men's Fraternity, as I reviewed those, I think we've made some significant progress, don't you? We've come a long way in 11 sessions. And we've learned that life must be more than responsibility. In fact, when I began to think about all the things that we've learned, we've learned that life is not just about responsibility. That life needs to be woven with fun and a sense of adventure. And that needs to be sometimes breathed back into a man. Because oftentimes life has a way of beating all that out of him. So much so that life just becomes a hard taskmaster. All you've got is a job and very little of a life. And you're going to work every day, and people admire maybe what you do and what you accomplish. But for you, life just becomes heavier and heavier, when in reality, what I want to give you permission to think about is making it more and more thrilling. But to do that, like William Wallace that we saw on the film clip, you've got to have courage. This last session, what I want to breathe into you is courage. Courage to be the real you. Courage to go on the real adventure. We've learned a lot. Let me just give you some things that we've learned as well. We've taken a hard look at some of those big, hairy questions, right? Who am I? Where am I going? Why am I here? We've gained some new insight as to how we as men are wired. I hope that helps you getting that big perspective of a man's wiring. We've taken an exciting look at the end of life. What men rarely do. We went all the way to the end and we camped there for a while. And we explored what the possible options are. at the end of life. And we learned that the best adventurer is the one who lives life with the end in mind. We've learned that the adventurer's sacred oath is this. Do you remember it? I will fervently live my life according to my design, always with the end in mind. That's the adventurer's sacred oath. We started our draft work, that's what I call it, our draft work on our life compass. And this morning, kind of as an early Christmas gift to you as you leave the auditorium today, I'm going to give you a life compass that you can take with you, that you can put in your wallet and carry with you everywhere you go, and periodically pull out and kind of say, how am I doing? And use that as kind of your North Star that you personally have. It's not to share with anybody else, it's just for you to keep refining where you're going and how you want to finish this life. That's at the end of this session. We've identified the major adventure busters that are out there seeking to destroy a man's great adventure. And I gave you some ways as to how to address each one of those adventure busters. That's not just your problem. These adventure busters are common to every man's life. Don't think you're alone in any of them. Every man has those busters out to destroy. And finally, we learned from the Scripture that God has at least 4 great adventures for each one of us, not to miss. The adventure of family, the adventure of fun and enjoyment, the adventure of discovering what our noble cause is in the world to make this a better place before we leave it. And finally, an adventure with God Himself, not to be missed in this life. You know what I call all that? Progress, right? We're making some progress, and I hope you feel that progress here as we finish up this last session of the first half of Men's Fraternity. Now this morning I want to do 2 things, and you see them there on your note. The first is I want to make some general observations about the game of life, and today I want to put life into kind of an athletic format for a moment. And then secondly, I want to unwrap one of what I think is history's greatest adventurers. So look on your outline there just for a moment. First, what I want to make is just some observations of the game of life, because most men's lives follow a predictable pattern. You're not alone. Your life is unique in its specifics, but generally it follows a common pattern. Years ago, Daniel Levinson wrote a massive work called Seasons of a Man's Life, where he took hundreds of men and followed their lives for over 10 years from all socioeconomic and racial backgrounds. And what he discovered out of that is all men's lives follow a particular common rhythm. Now, I'm not going to take the time to give you all the specifics of that, but I thought what I could do is generalize it a bit, like a football game or a basketball game. Because every man's life follows a fairly predictable pattern. For instance, between the ages of 1 and 20, I call that the warm-ups. That's just the warm-ups of life. It's getting ready to play the game. And some of us, between 1 and 20, warm up better than others of us. Some of us out there warming up, we pull both legs, muscles, and our rib cage and everything else, and we go into the first half kind of wounded. So some of us warm up better than others. Some of us find ourselves in those early years with better opportunities than others of us. Because sometimes life deals harshly with us in that warm-up period. Sometimes life deals generously with us in that warm-up period. But ages 1 to 20 are the warm-ups. Ages 20 to 40, that's the first half of play. That's when a man puts on as his primary face, his warrior face. You know there are 4 faces of manhood. There's the warrior face, the friend face, the lover face, and the king face. Those are the 4 faces that men wear. In the first half of life, the 2 primary faces that he wears are the warrior and the lover, but primarily the warrior. The fierce competitor that's going to step out in the world and carve out a niche for himself. And sometimes he has to step on and step over bodies to get there. But he's going to establish himself, hopefully, as a success. And he's going to fight during that period of time. Now, as any man will discover during that first half of play, playing the warrior and the lover has some drawbacks to it. You get bumped and bruised and hurt, and sometimes you make some big mistakes. And you begin to discover, especially at the end of that first half, you're tired. You don't have the strength that you used to have. So between 40 and 50, we go into what I call halftime. These halftime adjustments where you begin to think, I got to readjust. I'm not going to be able just to do this on strength alone for the second half. I've got to clean up some messes that I made. I took some shots in the first half. And I've got to deal with those injuries. So you make adjustments, hopefully, during this halftime. Now, that could occur before 40 or late, when you're in your late 40s or late 30s or whatever. Halftime can be somewhere in there, but generally it's that midlife kind of adjustment between 40 and 50. And if you make the right adjustments, then you go into the second half of play, which is between 50 and whenever life ends. And in this particular period, your predominant faces are not your warrior face and your lover face. If you do it right, your predominant face is your king face and your friend face. That's what stands out in the second half. It's that king who is the wise ruler. He's no longer the fierce competitor. He's got a lot of experience. He's learned a lot about life. He has certain assets that now he can deploy at will. And in this second half of his life, if he's wise about it, he becomes a wise ruler with all of that. And he deploys all that in a wise way, and he establishes himself as a noble. He becomes an asset to the community and an asset to others. And part of what brings him alive is he can breathe life into people around him because of what he's become. Now, those are kind of the stages of life in an athletic kind of metaphor for us to consider. Now, I want to give you some, if you notice on your outline, what I've given you is some helpful first and second half, what I call coaches. Because I thought about, if I were just wanting to sit down with you as an individual and assist you as a young man and say, hey, what's some collective wisdom you could take with you to really help you in the first half of life? What books would I give you? Now, books come and go. They're seasonal to each generation. And 30 years from now, we won't even be using these books, but we're in our particular slice of history. And so I put up 5 books that I thought would be some of the best recommendations I could give you. Not just to read. Don't read a book. A lot of guys just read through a book. I learned long ago I'd rather read less books, but the books I read, master them. Study them. Study them enough that the principles almost become intuitive in your personality because you've learned the principles and you believe them at such a depth that you can go and implement them. So I've given you 5 books on the first half that could encourage you in that regard. As you look on your outline, you can see there's some second half books as well. They're the same thing, to help men who are in the second half of life reconsider their lives, readjust their lives, reconfigure their lives so they can milk the best out of the second half of life. Those are, I just call, first and second half coaches for you to consider. Now let me make 2 observations on how men play the game. Notice first on your outline, many men are stronger in one half of the game than they are in the other. That's just what I've noticed about life. Many men are stronger in one half of the game than they are in the other. If you don't believe that, just go to your 20th high school reunion. And one of the things you're going to notice is those who played good in the first half didn't necessarily play it now as well in the second, and vice versa. You've got the star athlete who was Mr. Everything. He was a god in high school and college. And yet he squandered all of those assets in the second half. And then you've got over here this guy that you didn't even know that he went to high school with you. He was Mr. Nerd. He was the wallflower guy. He was the guy that guys stuffed in the locker and had a laugh. And now the star athlete works for him because he's become the CEO of a major corporation. Great second half. Indistinguishable, non-identifiable first half, powerful second half. You know, the Bible presents that as well. When you read through the pages of the Bible, it's real interesting. You see these guys with strong first halves, poor second halves, or vice versa. I want to look at some who had a strong first half. One that comes to mind immediately is David, the king of Israel, the golden boy in the first half. A guy who was pure as the driven snow, called out by a prophet, stepped out as the fierce warrior, and right off the bat had a Super Bowl victory over Goliath. Then became famed throughout all of Israel. People acclaimed his name, and he ascended eventually to become the king of Israel. And in that kingship, nobly brought all the tribes together and established the first real kingdom that Israel ever knew. Great first half. But if you read about his second half, it becomes more infamous than famous because he got bored. And in his boredom, committed adultery. And after adultery, committed murder. And then in all the melee that occurred after that, his kingdom began to unravel. In the midst of that, he took on numerous wives, became polygamous. His home life became an absolute wreck, where he spent much of his second half being hunted down by his son. Great first half, not so good second half. Solomon was the same way, one of David's sons. When God asked Solomon what he wanted, Solomon wisely said, I want to be wise. And he became the wisest man. In fact, he created the kingdom of Israel's, his leadership of the kingdom of Israel caused its zenith to reach its zenith in its influence over the world. Kings and queens from all over the world came to Israel to sit at Solomon's feet. But he became so wise that he became proud. And he did the very things that he, in his writings in Proverbs, forbid. And he took on numerous wives, and he started building armies for himself, and took on gold and silver, became prosperous and arrogant. And then you just watch his life deteriorate. And as his life deteriorates, so deteriorates Israel. So much so that by the time he dies, the nation splits in two. Great first half, poor second half. On the other hand, you can look in the Bible and see guys who didn't have such a good first half, but then made a tremendous difference in the second half. Moses. Here's a guy who unfortunately grew up in difficult circumstances. Orphaned, placed in Pharaoh's court, grew up with a mixed identity, confused about his life. Got to a place where he began to realize that he was Jewish and God had put into him the gift of leadership, but he didn't know how to exercise it. And when he tried to exercise it, he ended up murdering a man and got run out of town. Some of you probably had a background like that. You didn't necessarily murder somebody, but you got run out of town. And they were glad to see you go because of how you lived the first half of your life. That was Moses. And then he got out in a halftime out in the desert. And he made halftime adjustments. And out of those halftime adjustments, he became transformed as a man. He became wise and godly, and he had a vision for his life, and he walked into the greatest nation on earth and stood it down face to face and became known as the deliverer of Israel. Poor first half, great second half. Matthew is another individual the same way. Matthew was a tax collector. If you know anything about the first century, the bottom feeders of society the scumbags of society were tax collectors. Nobody wanted to be around them. The only friends they had were each other. That was Matthew. Until in the second half of his life, he met a man named Jesus Christ. And because of his response and because of his courage with Jesus Christ, his life was changed. And we don't think of him as a tax collector, we think of him as an apostle and the writer of the first book of the New Testament. Great second half after a poor first half. Now I say that because some men have a better one half than the other. On the other hand, what we're going to look at today is that some men live a complete and great adventure, both halves. And the life that we're going to look at, the adventure we want to look at this morning, who did it right all the way through, is the life of Caleb. The life of Caleb. Maybe somebody you've not considered, but a man who's a worthy model for any man here to emulate. Of any guy in the Bible, this guy's my hero. Because he did it right all the way through. And the more you study his life, the more you see some incredible insights of what it means to be a real adventure. So here's what I want to do. His life, if you looked in the Scriptures, you would see his life neatly fall into a first half and a second half. And so I want to take a moment and let the Scriptures just tell the story. I'm going to read. It's a little lengthy, but it'll bring us all on the same page, and I want to make some insights I think will be real powerful take-homes for each one of you. So let's look at the first half here by looking at Numbers 13. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send out for yourselves men so that they might spy out the land." Now here's Moses has been the deliverer. He's got them out in the wilderness. He's brought them out of Egypt. They're poised to go into what God called the promised land. The whole nation needs to go out. So they sent some spies out into that land to see how they could take that land. That's what's occurring here. So he said, "Send out for yourselves men so that they might spy out the land of Canaan, which I'm going to give you, to give to the sons of Israel. You shall send a man from each of their fathers' tribes, every one a leader among them." So 12 spies went up, among them Caleb, and spied out the land. And when they returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron, to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. Thus they told him and said, "We went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large, and moreover we saw the descendants of Anak there." Those were giant men. They were the big hairy arms of the Old Testament. "Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites and the termites and all the rest are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan." That's how they reported what they saw. And then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we shall surely overcome it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong for us." So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone in spying it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size, and we became in our own sight grasshoppers." Now let's stop right there for just a moment. Because let me tell you what we just read. We read a metaphor for the first half of a young man's life. A giant metaphor. Because in the first half of life, a young man's looking around, and what he wants is the best of life. Remember, he's the warrior. And he'll have all kinds of invitations about what's the best life. And he'll come across older men, more noble men that will tell him about the promised life. The promised life of God. Just like I've been talking to you about it. And a young man doesn't necessarily rush into that land, but he peers into that land and he looks around at that land, at what's in that land, and He hears about a great marriage and a great adventure and all those things. It's a land, it's a life flowing with milk and honey, but there are giants there. And there are walled cities in that land for a young man, and he sees them quickly. And what are those walled cities and who are those giants? Let me just list them for you for a moment. It's being pure. That's one of the cities. In an immoral age, it's staying pure. It's discovering how to have a relationship with God when I don't have a clue how to have a relationship with God. It's learning how to be intimate with my wife, who I'm struggling with now that we've been married for 3 years. And as I look at that giant and I hear somebody telling about intimacy for a lifetime, I feel like a grasshopper looking at that walled city of intimacy that I can't obtain as a young man. It's raising children right. It's learning who I am and accepting who I am and being proud of who I am rather than who I'm not. It's finding a noble cause to begin to invest in early as a young man. But I don't have a clue what a noble cause is or where I'm going. It's beginning to have a vision for my life, but I don't have any vision for my life. And when somebody talks to me like that, I just draw a blank. It's a giant. It's a walled city. It's cleaning out the wounds in my life as I begin to move into my late 30s or maybe even late 20s. And I realize I'm wounded. I've taken some shots and I've got to go clean that up, but I'm afraid to go clean those up. What might happen to me if I tried to clean those up? So I just try to stuff them down and hide them and think they're going to go away. Because before that wound, I'm a grasshopper. And that's what young men do when they go and spy out the land. And young men come back and they give a report. Some men give a bad report. And they say, it's too much. Let's don't go into the promised life. But a few men say, we can do it. And that's Caleb. Here's the rest of the story. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jehunnath, of those who had spied out the land, these 2 young men out of the 12, they tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. It's a good life. And if the Lord is pleased with us, then He will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord and do not fear the people of the land, for they shall be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear. But all the congregation said to stone them with stones. And the Lord said, surely you shall not come into this land. He's speaking now to the people, in which I swore to settle you. The only people who will come into this land is Caleb and Joshua. Your children, whom you said would become a prey, I will bring them into this land, and they shall know the land which you rejected. But as for you, your corpses shall fall in this wilderness. Let me give some observations. 3, real quickly. Notice the key ingredient to success, whether you get the promised life or not as a young man in the first half of life. The key ingredient for you, listen to me. The key ingredient for every young man here, if you're going to have the promised life, is going to be raw faith. Write it down and star it. It's going to be raw faith. You have nothing to bank it on except maybe a few older men saying, this is the best way to go. And a Bible that says, this is the best way to go. And you're going, but it looks too big. Some of these challenges are too hard. You can do it. But the only way you can do it is not because you have proof. You don't have proof. You're too young. The only thing you're going to be able to draw upon to get you through those things and to take that land is raw faith. Hear me. Raw faith. There's a hard truth of this story. The hard truth is this. Many young men will choose not to have raw faith. And here's what they're going to do. They're going to wander around in life in a wilderness for the first half of their life and squander their strengths. And part of what they'll do in that halftime adjustment is lick their wounds, because they wandered around, just like that generation of Israel, all those young men who wandered around in the wilderness, not going anywhere, because they were too afraid to take the best of life. And then finally, I just want you to see Caleb's exhortation to young men today. If he were here, here's what I think he'd say. Take the land, the promised life, because there's a promised life for every man here. And it's a good life. Jesus said it's an abundant life. Well, that's the first half. But you know, Caleb's story goes on. He has an incredible second half. I want to look at the second half of his life in Joshua 14. This is later on, and Israel has gone into the land, that second generation with those two young men, now older men. In fact, they're 85 years old now. These are old guys. They finally get into the land, and the young men take the lowlands. They go and conquer all these cities and stuff like that. And there's this moment where Caleb comes and talks to Joshua, the new leader of Israel. And here's what he says. He said, I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought word back to him as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt with fear, but I followed the Lord my God fully. And now behold, the Lord has let me live just as He spoke these 45 years from the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses when Israel walked in the wilderness. And now behold, I'm 85 years old today. And I am as strong today as I was in the day Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now for war and for going out and for coming in. Now then, listen, here's what he says. Now then, give me this hill country about which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day that Anakim were there, the giants, with great fortified cities. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out as the Lord has spoken. So Joshua gave Caleb the son of Jehunneth a portion among the sons of Judah, according to the command of the Lord to Joshua, namely Kiriath Arba, Arba being the father of Anak, that is Hebron. And so Caleb went up and drove out the sons of Anak, these giants. That's a metaphor, a historical event, but for us, a metaphor for the second half of life. And what do we see there in the second half of life? Listen to me closely, us older guys. Caleb didn't retire. He reloaded. Do you see that there? He didn't retire. He reloaded. He refocused his life on what was the best of life. And you know what the best of life is in the second half of life? It's the hardest, highest part of life that only older men can get to. See, when they went into the land, if you know anything about military campaigns, the lowlands are easy. That's what the young men took in their strength. But the best part of Israel is the mountainous country. And the best part of Israel even today is Hebron, the high country. It's the most beautiful of all of Israel. The problem is because it's the best, that's where the giants went and settled. They wanted the best part of it too. And the young men couldn't figure out how to take it, so they just took the lowlands. And then they ceased from war. And Caleb, seeing this, said, wait a minute, we ain't taken all the land. And so he goes to Joshua and says, listen, God said we were going to get here and take the land, all the land. I want the best. Send me. And let me take the best part of that land. And he went and he took it. Now here's what I would observe in light of that. First of all, the key ingredient for success for an older man, listen to me, it's fresh faith. What do I mean by that? It is so easy to become a success in the first half of life and then go into the second half of life. Now I'm 50, I've got my home, I've got my cars, I've got my investments, I've got my success, I've got my name in the community, I've got my Razorback club seats, I've got it all. And what I do is I go in after the young men conquer that, and rather than take the best part of life, which is mine now for the taking, I settle down in the lowlands with the young guys. And I hang out. And I quit. And in quitting, I get maybe a comfortable life, but I give up the best of life because I'm not willing to reload with a fresh faith that will drive me to the hill country. Here's the hard truth. Many older men often settle down in the lowlands and they squander their assets. And if you want to jot down what are their assets, here are their assets: their wealth, their wisdom, their influence, and their power. They squander those assets in the second half of life rather than using them for noble causes and for high country. What would Caleb's exhortation be today for an older man? I think it would be this: take the high ground. The best part of life. Use all the assets and all the advantages that you've been blessed with by God in this brief period that you have on a planet, and use it to fight for the good of life. That's what he would say. Now, there's some other real, I think, powerful observations in the life of Caleb, and I want to just take a moment. They're there on your outlines under letter B, and look at the best of what this adventure teaches us, because I think there are really 4 additional powerful truths that we didn't read here that I'm going to just note for you, because I think they're worth taking home with you. Here's the first one. The life of Caleb teaches us this: that background is never the deciding factor in life. Faith ground is always the deciding factor in life. Now you go, what does that mean? Well, let's look at Joshua just for a moment. Here's what Joshua said. I just want you to look at the verse for a moment because I'm going to just note one thing. It says, thus the sons of Israel did just as the Lord had commanded Moses, and they divided up the land. And then it says, then the sons of Judah drew up near to Joshua in Gilgal. And then it's got this little statement about Caleb that if you were reading your Bible, you would just read right on by. Wouldn't mean anything to you. Didn't mean anything to me. It just says, and Caleb the son of Jehunath, the Kenizzite. I looked up Kenizzite. Just said, who's Kenizzite? I hadn't heard of those guys. You know who the Kenizzites were? They were the enemies of Israel. And all of a sudden I went, whoa, Joshua is the son of an enemy? And I discovered Caleb's the son of an enemy? And I began to explore a little deeper, and what I discovered is Caleb's a half-breed. He's not even Jewish. His dad was a pagan. Now, we don't know the whole story, but somehow in his little adventure in life growing up, he grew up with a pagan dad. I don't know if they intermarried with a Jewish woman in Judah, how it all occurred, whether he was just adopted or whether at a later age he came to believe in the God of Israel and joined and was adopted into the tribe. I don't know how he got there. But this guy is of mixed blood. And then you know what else is interesting? You know what the word Caleb means in Hebrew? Dog. You know what dogs were in the Middle East and still are today? Dogs are not the little furry pets that we have in our homes. Dogs were considered outcast. And to be named dog was an insult. So here's this guy growing up, this little kid growing up, half-breed, mixed race, called dog. Hey, dog. Now let me tell you, do you think he'd carry some wounds in the first half of life? You think he'd be hurting? You think he'd have to struggle against the grain? You better believe it. But did he do it well? Oh, yeah. And you know how he did it? The same way Braveheart did it. What's a title? Remember him saying that? What's a title? What's a title mean? He said to the King of Scotland, what men want from you is courage. And Caleb reeked of courage, didn't he? Because he wanted the best of life, and he took it, not because of his background, but because he stood on faith ground. Secondly, a real adventurer lives by an inner vision, not by outward circumstances or cultural pressure. He lives by an inner vision, and he's richly rewarded for it. Look at Numbers 13. Here's what it says. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, remember, we should take the land. But the people went against him, and they said, we're not able to go against these people, for they're too strong for us. Then it goes on and talks about they wanting to stone him with stones. And yet he stood against those cultural pressures. And you know why? Because it says in Numbers 14:24 that Caleb had a different spirit. Let's look at Numbers 14:24. See at the bottom? It says, but all the congregation said to stone him with stones, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all of Israel. And the Lord said, but my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully. You know the difference of an adventurer from just ordinary men is a different spirit. And what is that different spirit? It's a different spirit of courage and faith. And that's what Caleb had. Thirdly, I want you to know that many of a man's greatest victories are decades in the making. Many of a man's greatest victories are decades in the making. You see, at age 40, Caleb made the decision that we should go into the land. But then everybody else said no, and Caleb had to, listen guys, Caleb had to wait 45 years before he got into the land and got what the Lord promised him. So for 45 years, he had to wander around with everybody else. But I think as a faithful man, he invested. He patiently waited. He stayed faithful. And at the end, he had him a little A-frame up on top of Mount Hebron enjoying the good life. He finally got there. But it was decades in the making. And there's a great principle, I think, in that, because he could have bailed out any time in those 45 years, said, man, I'm tired of this. But he stayed faithful. But I thought, you know, that's how it is with life. And that's how it is with a man's greatest victories. A marriage isn't made in 2 years. A good marriage is decades in the making. Noble character doesn't come about in a week. Noble character is forged out of the crucible of years of life before a younger man would look at you and go, I want to be like that. Healthy, productive children don't occur overnight. They're decades in the making. And so is a man's greatest accomplishments. You can do a lot when you're young, but man, if you live life like Caleb and gather your assets, in the second half of life, you can do some incredible feats and leave an incredible legacy. That's what Caleb's life teaches us. Many of the greatest victories are decades in the making. And then finally, I just want you to know that a great adventurer, this is number 4, empowers the next generation to reach high and do great things. Here's what I want you to know, you older men. You live like Caleb in the second half, and young men will be inspired by you, and they will want to be like you, no matter how you live the first half. That was true of Caleb. I want you to look at Joshua 15. Here's what it said. This is after he went up and began to take the high country, and there was a part of the high country where he needed help, and he said, the one who attacks this city and captures it, I will give him Axa, my daughter, as a wife. And this young man, who was a cousin of Caleb, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, captured it, and so he gave Axa, his daughter, as his wife. Now, that's kind of where the story ends in the book of Joshua. But Othniel, this young man, was captured by this adventurer's life, and he wanted to be like him. And he got drafted into the family. But years later, after Caleb had died, the nation of Israel went into spiritual decline. In fact, it went into spiritual anarchy. And in the midst of that anarchy, with everybody doing what was right in their own eyes, with Israel totally out of control, and the people begging for somebody to bring chaos back into order, to put us back on the right track, I want you to look what happened in Judges. And when the sons of Israel cried to the Lord raised up a deliverer from the sons of Israel to deliver them. Who was it, guys? Othniel, who's now not a young man, he's an old man. The son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel. And then look what happened to the land of Israel. The land of Israel had rest for 40 years. Because one man stepped forward with courage, inspired by an adventure in his day as a young man, and he now became the inspiration to a whole generation in his older years. That's what Caleb teaches us. A great adventurer who did it right, first half and second half. Now, as I close this morning, I'm just going to give you a list of things that I think are take-homes for the two halves of life. And if I had each one of you one-on-one and you were to ask me across the table as a young man, maybe you're 30 years old or 25 or 34, and you say, how do I take the land in this first half of my life? Give me some practical advice. Okay, I'm going to list it for you. Here's what I'd tell you, just you and me. I'd give you these 9 principles. First, invest regularly in your marriage and make your wife your best friend. Don't think it'll be easy. It'll be a challenge. But you can do it if you have raw faith. Secondly, learn who you are. If there's one gift I'd want to give every young man, is to know who you are. That's why that Discover Your Design stuff is so important. But let me tell you, what is equally important for every young man here to help you live your life best is to also admit who you're not. Most young men can't do that. So they squander a portion of their life banging their head against the wall saying, I can do this, I am this, and they're not. So learn who you are and who you're not. Thirdly, always live within your means. Stay out of debt. Learn to save and give away. If you can't learn that now, you'll never be great in the second half because you'll be stingy and selfish and self-absorbed. But to get there, to have that great victory in the second half, you've got to learn to be generous in the first half. And that won't be easy when everybody else seems to be getting ahead, buying new cars, buying houses they can't afford. But you've got to have a different spirit. Fourth, go for great experiences in the first half over acquiring more stuff. The stuff will fade. The experiences will grow richer every year. Fifth, get to know God personally. That will take effort. It won't happen automatically. Sixth, never stop fighting for purity and a life of integrity. It's the foundation for a successful second half. You know, by the time you get to be my age, having a lot of stuff, being a competitor against the other guys, let me just tell you, except for the ones who are still living in adolescence, it doesn't mean much. You know the guys that stand out when you get to be 50 and 60? It's the guys who have a good name. That's the guys that stand out. A good name because they have integrity. Seventh, learn to ask for forgiveness from God and others. Best thing a young warrior can learn is to say, I'm sorry. Because it helps him keep short accounts. Eighth, develop men friends you can love and be accountable to. A personal board. To help keep your life clear and on track. And then finally, 9, start developing and refining a long-range vision, a North Star for your life. I've been encouraging you in that, but I think it's real important that you know where you're going long term to make right decisions now. Now, is this going to be easy? I'm going to tell you, it's not going to be easy. These are fortified cities. These are giants in the land. But as a warrior, you can be victorious if you have raw faith. But here's what I want you to write down in big letters, guys, at the bottom. You young men, take this land. Put it down there. Take this land. But if you're going to take the land, you're going to have to do it with raw faith. Okay, what about us older men? What would I say? If you and I were sitting down at the table as older men, talking about, well, okay, what about a second half? Give me some take-homes. Here's what I would offer. The challenge is different, but I'm going to tell you, it's just as exciting. In fact, to be real honest, it needs to be more exciting. Here's number one. Don't retire. Refocus. Don't retire. Refocus. Make your life count in the second half. If you've been focused on finishing up life and focusing on you, that is going to be a small, small thing to live for. And it won't be satisfying, even as you lavish yourself with all kinds of things. Now, you need to have fun experiences, but if that's all it is, it won't be enough. It's not the high country. It's the lowlands. Secondly, make sure you know what makes you come alive. Because an older man needs to narrow his focus and do what I'm going to tell you in number 3, and that is build on your strengths. Build on your strengths. You've got a few bullets left, but they're more powerful bullets than a younger man. So fire those missiles well. Fourth, this is very important, clean up unfinished business in your life. Reconcile broken relationships. Forgive those who have hurt you. Apologize for wrongdoing you've been spending the first half of your life trying to justify. You know, the best thing an older man can do with a son that he neglected because he was working so hard as a warrior is just to make an appointment with his son and sit down and say, son, I didn't spend enough time with you. I'm sorry. Rather than trying to justify why he was away all the time. Or to pull his kids together because he left his mom when he was 22. And the whole last 18 years he's been trying to justify why he divorced his wife to his kids. And his kids never bought it. In fact, his kids just got more angry because he tried to justify it. But all that can be resolved if an older man will just sit down with his kids and say, I did the wrong thing. I shouldn't have left your mom. I didn't know any better. I was selfish and I was wrong. Will you forgive me? For an older man to really take off in the second half of life, he's got to have no accounts. Just clean stuff behind him. That's why it's important to clean up unfinished business. Fifth, discover your noble cause and serve there and serve others. Sixth, invest in younger men, whether you did it right or not. I mean, if you messed up the whole first half, you got a lot to share with a young man. How you messed up. And they'll benefit by it. Seventh, get to know God if you've left Him out of the first half, because there's still time to do so. Don't ever think there's not time. There's always time to get to know God. Eighth, decide what's fun in the second half and then do it. Be creative. In fact, yearly plan 2 or 3 memory-making experiences with your wife and go for it. And then finally, number 9, keep refining a long-range vision. Keep refining your focus. Keep reaching high into the hill country. Here would be my exhortation. Take this high ground in the second half of life, but it's going to require not you leaning back on all your experiences. Let me tell you guys, it's going to be just as scary as in the first half of life. It's going to require a fresh faith. Well, guys, today we end the first half of Men's Fraternity. And let me just say as I finish, thank you for letting me set forth this great adventure for each one of you. It's been a real privilege of mine and Bill's to be able to do that. I want to thank you for being so faithful. You guys have been unbelievably faithful these last 11 weeks, and I want to thank you for it. And maybe the thing I want to thank you for the most is thank you for being part of my great adventure. It's been an honor.
Thank you for listening to this week's message. It really helps us when you rate and review this podcast. If you found today's teaching helpful, take time to do that today. This podcast was produced by the team at Sound of a Rose. Visit soundofarose.com for any of your podcasting needs.